You're here tonight to hear from Bryan Hansel, who is a professional photographer and is going to talk to us about landscape and adventure photography. We all love the adventures that we go on, and many of us take pictures. Most of us don't have pictures the quality of what I've seen of Bryan's, what he's got posted online. And so he's going to give us some tips and suggestions for that. Bryan's an award-winning professional landscape photographer and outdoor educator. He has over 30 years of photography experience with over 100 publication credits from various publications: National Geographic, Outdoor Photographer, Lake Superior Magazine, Ocean Paddler, and many, many more. In 2018, he received Lake Times Magazine's Best Photographer in Minnesota award. He's also an outdoor educator and a guide at heart. I first ran into Bryan at an inland sea symposium when I was first starting to kayak, and he did a day trip about outdoor photography and kayaking photography. So he's going to tell us all about ways to make our pictures better. So take it away, Bryan.
All right. Well, first, before I get started, I just want to thank everybody for coming and listening to me, and thanks for setting this up for Em and Stacy. Appreciate it, and thanks for running the Zoom meeting. So it sounds like you guys are real active, which I guess I knew before being invited. I knew that you were a pretty active club, so it's exciting to be here. So tonight I'm going to talk about landscape and adventure photography. And I just want to mention that I really like to have questions. So if you have any questions, I like to answer them kind of as you think of them, or you can hold them to the end. So the easiest way for me to see the questions is if you enter them into the chat box. So we'll be monitoring the chat box, and I'll try to I have a 2-monitor setup, so I always try to pay attention to the chat box while looking at my presentation while I present on Zoom. So feel free to ask questions as they come up, or you can wait till the end to ask them as well. If nobody has any questions right now, I just say we get started here, and just let me get this shared. All right. So, and then there's the title screen. And if you're wondering where that's at, that is in my backyard, basically. So that's the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. So I'm assuming people have been there before. And so the topics tonight, so I got just 4 main topics. Is the first part of what I like to do is define what landscape and adventure photography is to me, because it might have a different meaning for you or other photographers. Then I'm going to show some samples of my work, which shows, the type of adventure and landscape photography I do. I'll talk about the gear that I use, and then I actually today actually ran some statistics to see what I was actually shooting, so I can make some recommendations based on what I actually shoot based on statistics from my photos. And then I'll give you a couple of quick photo tips on how to bring home great photos when you're out on your adventures. So I think there's just a few things that you can do to make great shots. So to define landscape photography, it's just it's pretty easy, and adventure photography, I suppose, as well. It's just photography that happens outdoors. So that's the simplest way that you can define it. For me, I make that definition a little bit, or I define it a little bit more strictly. So landscape photography is photos of primarily the landscape, including only human objects or wildlife if they seem to belong in the landscape. So, this would be very typical of what I would consider landscape photography, and a subset of landscape photography, which is called seascape photography. So seascape photography is just where you have the ocean or Lake Superior, or just maybe a lake, So this is Gust Lake, just up on the grade, which is in Cook County. It's one of the primary roads in the county. And all you have to do is step out of your car and there you are for sunrise. So it's one of the easiest pictures you can get. So another way that you can define landscape photography is by saying what isn't landscape photography. So because a lot of times I say landscape photography and people are like, hey, well, so you take pictures of wildlife. And I'll get to that question in just a second. I see a question there. There's wildlife photography isn't landscape photography. So if you're out there taking pictures of bison licking their toes while mooning you, you're probably not a landscape photographer. But if a moose walks in front of your landscape shot while you're waiting for sunrise, that's a-okay, because it's a part of the landscape. So we can see that moose just down there in the foreground. But the primary motivation for being at this spot at this time of day was to get the reflections of the mountains into the water. And then I'll go through what else isn't, and then I'll get the questions that are in there. So the other thing that I don't think that landscape photography is, I don't think it's macro photography. So I don't think that it's getting close to things and taking close-up pictures, although that is something that I do as well. I think it's a very good pursuit. And I actually took up insect photography in 2020 and found that my yard was a really great place to explore. So I'm always looking at, in 2019, I traveled 100 days. So I went to 100 days to various parks all over the country. And in 2020, I hardly traveled at all, but I traveled a lot in my yard and learned that my yard has a lot of interesting insects in it and different flowers and stuff. Now, that said, you can use like a macro-like flowers in your landscape shot. So here is the flowers, but I wouldn't call this a macro shot, even though it has close-ups of flowers in it. It's more of a landscape shot. So we had a couple of questions. So top 10, send me top 10 to me so I can include them in the rovers. And gotcha. Any ideas on improving night photography? That's an entire presentation on your own, but the quick way to do it is ISO 6400, 30 seconds, and f2.8 on a really wide lens. Use a tripod, shutter release cord, and use your LCD screen on the back of your camera to manually focus on a star in order to get it sharp. So these are things that I do teach. So I missed that in my introduction, but I do teach photo workshops, and night photography is one of the ones that I do it. And then how did you get the water to look so amazing in the ocean photo, which was this one, I believe. So this is a longer shutter speed. So this kind of blurry, half not blurry look comes from a longer shutter speed. So the shutter speed is about a second here. And in order to get a second long exposure when the sun's up, it typically involves putting a filter on your lens. In this case, it was a 5-stop more slow filter from a company called Stingray. Which I'm an ambassador for Stingray. So, yeah. Let's get back to here. So what is adventure photography? It happens outdoors, just like landscape photography. And I have a more strict kind of definition for the way that I do it. Adventure photography is photography that happens on an outdoor adventure or depicts adventurous human activities in the outdoors. So you can do adventure photography when you're not on an adventure. And I got an example of each type here. So I think both of these fall into the adventure category story. The one on the right is pose. So this was taught during a photo workshop that I was teaching, or it was something that we set up during a photo workshop, which actually is an adventure. So it's a trip for people. We come out and we take photos all over the country. But we set up this traditional looking snowshoes, which are a pair of snowshoes I made with the sun behind it. And if we zoom in, you can see there's like a nice starburst in there, which is fun to make. So you set your camera at f22 and hide the sun partially behind something. And then over on the left-hand side, this is an actual adventure. So this couple is Dave and Amy Freeman. They're friends of mine. And this is the end of a 3-year expedition they were on. They started in believe it was Seattle. They went to Alaska, and then they dog sledded across Canada, canoed across Canada, and then kayaked down to the Florida Keys. And I met them in the Keys and paddled like the last week with them. So this is the very end of their trip. So certainly adventure. But adventures don't have to be that big. Adventures can be day trips. So adventures can be an hour trip. So here's an adventure that we had late in the day. One day this is on the new mountain bike trails that run from the ski hill, Lutzen Mountain Ski Hill, to this one goes to Onion River Road, and eventually it goes all the way over to Sawbill. What is that called? Britton Peak Trailhead outside of Tofty. And they needed the club. This was before it was open, and the club needed pictures. So we got a bunch of friends together and we went out and we shot these photos for it. And the interesting thing, I think, in this shot is you notice how clean the trail looks. See all these leaves right next to the trail. Does everybody see that? And then if you notice how clean the trail looks, well, one of us brought a leaf blower with us so that we could blow the trail off in order to get the pictures. But I certainly consider that adventure photography as well. So I think it's good to also define what isn't adventure photography. And what isn't adventure photography that sometimes appears to be is, I think, portraiture. We certainly can take portraits when we're on adventures, but if we're just taking portraits to take portraits, it's not depicting something adventurous, some kind of activity, it's probably not adventure photography. So this is a reenactor at Grand Portage. So every August they do what's called rendezvous days, and about 100, 200 reenactors come to Grand Portage area and reenact the fur trade. And then the tribe also runs their annual powwow that time. So you can see reenactors, and then you can go up and get fry bread and watch the dancers at the powwow. So it's a really fun weekend. But here's another example of portraiture. But in this case, we have our paddler is setting a course to do a crossing from an island to mainland in the Gulf of Mexico. So a portrait, yes, but what makes that different than the previous one is there's some sort of action going on that says, hey, this is the outdoors. Another popular type of photography, which I enjoy a lot, which is not adventure photography, although sometimes it can look like it, is street photography. This is just where you're walking around town and you're taking photos. And these two gentlemen in Grand Marais were about to close the door on their Model T. I believe that's a Model T. And I caught him right before he closed it and had him pose. Actually, you can see the look on his face. He's like, "What? Why are you taking my picture?" But this guy over here agreed. And then the other thing that I don't think is adventure photography, which is sometimes confused for it, is just travel photography. Like you're out traveling, you go to a park and you're walking around the park. So this is out in Nebraska at Scotts Bluff, and it's walking around a park to me by the visitor area is probably not adventure photography. Now, if you were to backpack there, it certainly could be, or if you were to go on a day hike there and depict day hikes, it certainly could be. But even when I do all of these definitions on what this stuff means to me, everything in photography sort of mixes together. So that's what's pretty cool about photography. And if you take it up yourself and practice your own kind of photography, there really are no rules to any of it. And you can mix it up however you want. So like on a single day, I might be, taking pictures of somebody posing in a hero pose. I might also on that same day do a seascape, and I might also do macro shots. So this is dead man's fingers is what they call that, which is a really fun one to find around here. So the next thing is I just want to show you some of my work and how I've interpreted those sort of definitions. And this picture right here is this same hole, a different time of day. And this is not the last time that Lake Superior froze over so you could hike to the Apostle Island ice caves, but it was the year before that come from it. So hopefully that freezes up again so we can get out there in the winter again, because it's a really fun experience. So here's one of the types of things that I like to do is night photography. And I mentioned before, it's actually really formulaic. The hardest part in night photography is learning how to focus on the stars. And then the other hardest part is learning how to compose at night without being able to see much through your viewfinder and your camera. But I consider this, I call it nightscapes, and I consider it a subset of landscapes. So basically, you're making a landscape underneath the starry skies. And this is in Cook County, and we have very dark skies up here, Cook County, Minnesota, and this is very dark. So we do see the Milky Way, although it is slightly enhanced in the photos versus what your eyes would see. So the camera can capture so much more light and can capture so many more colors than your eye can actually see at night. So it looks different than what your eyes would see. So this is kind of my standard fare right here, just like plain old landscape. I show up at sunrise or sunset, and I'm going to shoot at that time of day. It's called the golden hour. So you have sunrise, and then you have an hour after sunrise, which is called the golden hour. And then about an hour before sunset, there's another golden hour. And everything is just beautiful during that time of day. If you're a landscape photography, that's when you're out in the field and then you're doing all your computer work, or if you're out on a trip that you jump in the canoe during the midday and you're not shooting very much as far as a landscape stuff, except during those golden hours of the day. Here's some other examples. So, this is more of a telephoto, which is, I used to think it was rare for me, but I ran the statistics and about 33% of what I do is telephoto shots. And this is in the Badlands, and this is just a Badlands formation glowing with the morning light. So that's that golden hour light. And this is a cedar tree in the foreground that's just in the shadow. So you get that nice kind of painterly cutout look to it. Here's up at Sawbill Lake near Tofty in the Boundary Waters, just at sunset. Just after the golden hour, as the sunset is going down, it lights up the sky, and that's really the bread and butter of landscape photography. Is you're hoping for this to happen right here, is you want these bright, brilliant, sunlit scenes, and in order to get a shot like this, or the one over on the right hand side, is this is a sunset and this is a sunrise, but I'll show up like 45 minutes to an hour early, find a composition, set up my composition, and then wait. So sometimes I'll be waiting for 45 minutes on a single composition just to wait for the light to get perfect. Now that does kind of conflict with adventure photography, because in adventure photography, you're not usually just sitting around. You're usually doing something. But here's a few other examples. So these are some of my favorite destinations in the United States. The first two here are Death Valley. So this is the sand dunes in Death Valley. This is the Mesquite sand dunes in Death Valley. And this one right here, I wish I would have loaded the video now that I think about it, is we got hit by a sandstorm immediately after this, and we had to run back to the car in a pure, I don't even know what you call it, a sand out. It's not like a white out, which is a snowstorm. It's like a snowstorm, but with gritty sand, and you could hardly see anything. We were lucky we got back to the cars. I videoed myself screaming the whole way, and the guy thought I was crazy probably, but I had a good time anyways. This is in the Smoky Mountains. So one of the favorite things that I like to incorporate into my landscape shots are these old buildings. Anytime I can get old mills. This is an old mill. They actually still grind things in it. And I do this one on a workshop I teach out there, and I know what time to be there because every morning the guy that runs the mill comes in and starts a fire. So if you're in the right location at the right time, you can get the smoke coming out of the smokestack for the mill. And the only way you're going to learn this stuff is by spending the time out there. It's all, if you get good at adventures, it's just about being out there. And then this last shot here is my other favorite place to shoot. And this is like Cook County. So this is Cook County, Minnesota. Those are kind of some of my favorites. And then Badlands, which we saw earlier. And then surprisingly close to us, amazingly beautiful and often overlooked is Northeast Iowa. So Northeast Iowa, I think if photographers learned about Northeast, and don't tell anybody I'm telling you this, but if photographers learned about Northeast Iowa, it would be overrun because it's beautiful. There's a place called the Palouse out in Washington, and it has very similar scenes to this. And you can show up at a sunrise location. There'll be 50, 60, 100 photographers standing there waiting for the photos. Same with the Smokies, same with Death Valley. And then Iowa, I was the only person there on this morning. And this is overlooking the Mississippi River Valley in Northeast Iowa. So those are kind of the landscape stuff that I do. And then we'll get into the adventure side of things. I'm a sea kayaker. I used to be sea kayaking instructor, and I used to own a sea kayaking guiding business. So a lot of my photos incorporate water sports. I'm also a canoeist. It's my favorite thing to do is canoe and kayak and bike ride and hike and photograph and all kinds of stuff. But this is Tetagooch State Park in the winter. Not very many kayakers kayak in winter. So if you have the skills and the equipment and the ability to kayak in winter, it can be quite safe. And you get amazing shots like this. I mean, how often do you see, the inside of a sea cave covered with icicles in the middle of winter on Lake Superior with crystal clear water? This actually won me a contest. I won a sea kayak from this picture. So it's here's some other things that I do that's indicative to the way that I look at adventure photography. So this is a selfie. A lot of times I'm out by myself because I do a lot of solo adventures. So I have to engineer how to take pictures of myself while on solo trips. This is my family. So this is my kid. He's 7 years old, and that's my wife in the bow. And this is a buddy of mine. A lot of the people I hang out with are also photographers. I believe he was setting up. This is Dave Freeman. I believe he is setting up a video at this point. I can't remember what he was doing, but I think he was composing it to shoot some video for Wilderness Classrooms, which is an organization that they run. So here's some other kind of that adventure look to it. So, you have to eat. It might not be something that you think would be a good in a slideshow, but I've actually used this in multiple slideshows, and it hasn't run in a magazine yet, but it might. Sitting around the campfire are good things if you don't want to get, these are kind of the camp pictures. Having somebody stand next to explosive waves is that kind of adventure. This was actually a very posed shot. We were just hiking in Grand Marais. This is out on Artist Point, which is right in Grand Marais on a wavy day. And my wife got this yellow coat this year, and I was like, honey, will you go stand out there in my picture? And she gets so sick of me taking her pictures, but she puts up with it. I don't know how I lucked out, but she does put up with me making her to be a model all the time. But I think it's one thing, at least for me, was I started documenting all these things that I was doing with my friends, my buddies. So I used to be a mountain climber, rock climber. And I found that for me, the photos were cool at documenting it. It showed a lot of action, but I wanted something more from adventure photography. So I found that I like to set up shots the best I can in the best conditions that I possibly can get to make it a half landscape, half adventure photo. And this would be an example. So here we are paddling, and we have these amazing conditions that are early morning. Now, the downside to this is you have to talk your friends, family, or whatever in order to get packed up, the tent in the bag, all of your stuff ready to go in the portage pack in the canoe while it's still an hour after sunrise. So this was taken, I think this was taken like 45 minutes to an hour within sunrise. So we're still in that early morning golden light that you would shoot in. And I got a shot. This ran on the front of a magazine. So, yeah. And here's another example of this. So this is my buddies, Dave and Amy Freeman. Again, they were on that long trip. We were heading through the Boundary Waters. We just spent a month in the Boundary Waters paddling from Voyager National to Grand Portage. This was on the Pigeon River. And normally people portage around this spot. And I was like, it would be really cool. So there's a, if you can't see it, so this is a Pigeon Falls in the background, and there's a nice portage trail that goes around it. And then down, you're not seeing this down below us. There's a series of rapids that you have to go through if you portage down by the waterfall. But it was the end of the day and the sun was backlit. And I was like, you guys, if we go down there, it's going to be epic shot. So we all three portaged this like terrible portage to get in. It was, really hard to load our boats, but we managed to get this shot, which also ran on the cover of National Park Traveler magazine. So it's a little bit extra work for what I do for adventure photography now, because I'm trying to mix that. Here's another example: late afternoon light, and that low light reflecting off the trees in the black background causes the entire water to go green with the reflected trees. And that's my wife again, being very gracious and paddling for me. Or sometimes at sunrise, after I shoot my sunrise shots, I'll quickly set up a shot of me just solo in the outdoors somewhere. And then some of these shots, now there are a certain subset of paddlers that get really annoyed when they see a boat on the water without a person attending it, but I'm not one of them. And I found that for me, what I really love doing for adventure photography and landscape photography is mixing these landscape shots with the boat in it. So here's a sea kayak, and this really annoyed a lot of people online because there wasn't a rope. But it was securely anchored on rocks, which is how I got it to sit still. So there's actually rocks on each side of it, holding it in place. But here's some other examples of what that looks like. This shot over here, I think the podcast, it's like a YouTube podcast called Behind the Shot or something like that. If people are interested, you can email me. I'll get you a link. It's on YouTube. It's an hour episode where we talked just about this photo and how I made it. So if you're interested, that's available online. And I've gotten a little bit more complicated in how I set these up now, where I'm getting my landscape adventure. It's always at sunrise or sunset. So here's an easy one. It's just me sitting next to the canoe. But over here, I had my wife go paddle out underneath this tree. And then I had to compose in a way in order to get the clouds behind the tree at sunset. So there's quite a bit going on here. In order to get any detail on the ground, I used a filter. So yeah. So I got a question over there. Do you use any photo editing software? Yes, I do. I use Adobe Lightroom primarily is what I use. I used to use Photoshop a lot more, but mainly everything that I do with editing can be done in Lightroom. So I learned how to photograph in black and white in the old dark rooms. So a lot of my editing technique comes from there, where I dodge and burn stuff. So you either brighten something or you darken something. So burning is called darken, dodging is called brightening. So a lot of what I do for editing is I do the color, the kind of the standard color correction that you would do if you were a lab tech printing prints. You do the color correction, contrast correction, density, all that stuff, and then you dodge and burn. So like might darken one area or brighten another. So if we're looking at this shot right here, I brightened up this area so that you could see some more detail in the foreground. So you could just barely make out the colors in there. In the original file, this was just all black. So I managed to bring out the detail there, brought the detail and the gunnels out just by dodging in there. This spot right here behind the paddler was very, very bright. So I burned that to darken it down. And then I darkened a little bit of the sky. You can see I pulled what's called a grad in, so it darkens it gradually and tapers off. So I pulled that in. And what ends up happening in editing is anytime you darken something, your eyes are forced away from it. Anytime you brighten something, your eyes are attracted to it. So by darkening this area, I force your eyes down here to which an area that was already bright, but then I didn't want your eyes to get stuck there. I wanted them to come back here to the tree. So I brightened the foreground to attract your attention to that foreground. So the other question is Lightroom or Photoshop for beginners. I would recommend Lightroom for any photographer now because it's an organizational software, plus it does almost everything that you would want to do as a photographer. So that's where I would recommend learning. And just to do a shameless self-promotion here is I do offer an online Lightroom class. It's not open for registration yet. It will be open hopefully by the end of the month. And I run it in November. So it's a synchronous learning online. So you meet twice a week for 2 weeks. And I go through, kind of give you the crash course in Lightroom. So if you're interested in that, sign up for my newsletter and I'll announce that opening when it becomes available. So, but I expect to have that open by the end of this month. All right, so let's get into gear. Okay, so another question before we get into gear is, how did you get your work noticed, recognized when you first started out? It was a lot different when I first started out. So I first started out when we were using slide film. Digital photography wasn't really a thing. I believe I used version 1 of Photoshop, which was not very good. So back then you would send out your slides to various organizations. So if you wanted to get published in a magazine, you'd send them a bunch of slides, and then they would reject you, and then you would send slides to somewhere else and they would reject you. And it was also a different market, as the magazines were very popular back then. So there's not a lot of magazines left anymore. And they continually fold all the time. So what the way that I found it is, I have a writing background. So I went to school at University of Iowa to become a fiction writer. It was an undergrad fiction workshop, but none of that worked out. I didn't turn into Hemingway, but I found that I could write. So what I would do is I would pitch articles to magazines about whatever topic, niche topic, usually canoeing or kayaking. And then I would submit my photos along with that article. And I found that that was really a good way to get recognized as a photographer, because at that point, they started to come to me for photos. As the magazine market deteriorated and crashed, I was lucky in that I was an early adopter of digital photography and social media. So I lucked out in making a lot of connections that way. It's a lot harder now for starting photographers, but if you're just starting out to get recognized, regionally for us in Minnesota, there's still a lot of regional magazines. So like Minnesota Monthly, they accept submissions from photographers, particularly for their back page. Lake Superior magazine is always looking for photos. So what I would recommend doing is find your niche market and then target any remaining magazines in that area, especially local magazines, because local magazines are doing okay, whereas the national magazines tend to struggle. And I used to say social media for that one, but I just don't think that social media is as good as photographers now as it was back then. Although if you really want to try to get recognized on social media, Mastodon may take off, which is a new social media network called Mastodon. If it takes off, if you get on it now and you build a following early and it takes off, it could be a good opportunity. I've gone on it and I've made some decent amount of money off it already selling calendars. So, do I do any cell phone photography? Yeah, I always have a cell phone with me, so I'm always taking pictures with it. I'll show you some photos from it, so I'll answer that one in just a second. So, gear. So this is this layout that you see right here is typically what I bring on a Boundary Waters trip. So if you want to believe it, 2 camera bodies, multiple batteries, ton of filter bags, filter holders, just all kinds of stuff, big old tripod, and Insta 360, 360 degree action camera, just all kinds of stuff. And here's the list. I don't know that. I mean, look at this thing. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll slowly scroll through it. So if you want to pause, it's also on my website, which is bryanhansel.com. You can just go to the gear section. It's all on there. The important things here, I think, is whatever camera you have. And then as an outdoor photographer, you want 3 categories of lenses. You want a wide angle lens. So something in the 14 to 30 range, 16 to 35. You want a mid-range zoom, something that goes from 24 to 105 at least. If you're in the Nikon system, it's 24 to 120. And then you want some sort of telephoto. I think that most amateur photographers would be best suited by a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. So skip the 70 to 200 2.8 lens. You don't need it. Macro if you want it. But a 100 to 400 would suit most, or a 150 to 600. But I found that my 100 to 400 is in the shop right now, but when it wasn't in the shop, it was one that I used a lot last year. Multiple primes, those are just for night photography. And then I use a lot of filters in my photography, and I'm going to show you, I'll show you what specific filters that I do use, but there's the list. For coming to a presentation with me, if you do want to buy filters from Stingray, you can go to their website. If you buy direct, enter your code that Hansel at checkout. You save 10% because you've been to a presentation with me now. And the same goes true for Kinesis gear. So if you buy direct and you enter the code Hansel15, you can save 15% on filter pouches and whatever else they sell. So they sell all kinds of lens holders and just a ton of stuff. And then I carry, I always have some kind of tripod with me. For landscape photography, a tripod is a must. I use a Really Right Stuff Versa with a Really Right Stuff BH55 ball head with a panning clamp because people ask me when they see it, that's what it is. I don't know that you need that. That's just what I have. It's let's just say that this tripod is very expensive, probably one of the more expensive ones out there. When I'm traveling, this is a budget one that you can pick up for less than $200 on Amazon. It's the Siri AM254. So if I'm on any backpacking adventures, hiking, canoeing, kayaking, that's what comes with me. And again, this is all listed on my website. So if you don't want to memorize it right now, you don't need to. And so what about large sensor compact zoom cameras for us amateurs who need to travel light? Yeah, those are actually really cool cameras. So if you don't know what they're talking about, so there's these things called point and shoot cameras, which are on the major decline just because cell phones are taking over their place in the marketplace. But there's some that have a lot, they're like a point and shoot with a big sensor. So they take good quality images. Of a friend of mine, Paul Sundberg, who used to be the park superintendent at Gooseberry State Park. He's also my neighbor. He lives just a block away from me now. He actually shoots most of his stuff with a large center compact camera now. So he's using a Sony RX10. I'm not sure what version it is, but Sony RX10. And he's just taking all the shots with them. He gets awesome shots. So they're great cameras. Here's my breakdown for lenses in 2022. So this is what I ended up shooting with. Wide angle, I was only 25% of the time, which blew my mind away because I thought it would be more. Telephoto 25 and mid-range zoom was 34%, and then other lenses elsewhere. The interesting thing for me is mid-range zoom is my 24 to 120. 38% was shot in wide angle and 13% was shot as a telephoto. So most of the time I'm using my mid-range zoom as either a telephoto or a wide angle. So I think if you only wanted two lenses as a landscape adventure photographer, you can go with a wide angle and a telephoto. Although mid-range zoom does give you the ability to go wide and telephoto in one lens, which makes it really handy for having around. If I was just going to buy one lens for like an interchangeable lens system, I would get a 24 to 120 or 24 to 105. So.
Bryan, there is another question in the chat about waterproof point and shoot cameras.
Yeah, I don't know what's out there now. The one in the past that was always the best was the Olympus. Whatever version the Olympus is, whatever the current version of Olympus is, the one that I would get. I use, I don't do that. I'll show you what I'll use when I'm out on the water. But it'll come up. I'll show you what use when I'm in the water. But I have had a waterproof Nikon. They used to make a digital waterproof interchangeable camera that they don't make anymore. I actually loved that camera. I feel bad I sold it actually. So actually on the when I first met Fran, I had that camera on a trip I was leading. So. Filters. So in this scene, this is like my basic filter kit. And what you're seeing here is a filter holder. This would be a polarizer. And what polarizers do is they intensify colors and remove reflections. This is called a solid ND filter. So more slow is what Stingray calls it. And this is a 5-stop. That's just for blurring water. So that's how you get that nice, cool blurred water at sunrise. And then these are called split neutral density filters. You put the clear part over the ground and the dark part over the sky, and it balances the exposure between the ground and the sky. And usually, like in a presentation, I can't see everybody's hands because there were so many people here, but usually I ask, show of hands, is how many people have taken a shot where the sky is absolutely beautiful, but the foreground's completely black? Raise your hand if you've done that. I've done it. Or if you've taken a shot where the foreground's absolutely beautiful and the sky is completely blown out white. Who's done that one? I've done that. Well, these filters allow you to do it. You could also do it in software. I'm old school. I like to do it in the field. And here's that code again. If you want to get Stingray filters, you can use that code, that Hansel. So that's my big kit. The other gear that I like to use, and this kind of falls into all these questions, is what if we don't want to carry that massive bag of gear, right? We just want one camera. So if I just want one camera, this is what I bring. This is a Ricoh GR3. It's a fixed 28 millimeter lens with a really big sensor. So it's an APS-C size sensor. I've shot night photography. I've done landscape with this. I carry it in my pocket wherever I go. And when I'm on water trips, I just put it in an otter case. It fits perfect in this otter case. And that's what I use. If I'm canoeing, I don't even put it in this case. I just keep it in my pocket. And if I fall in canoeing, well, I deserve to ruin my camera. So, but in sea kayaking, I definitely keep it in this bag all the time. This fits great in your pocket when you're out biking, when you're hiking. It's easy to get to, and the image quality is just fantastic. Another version that you could get as a high quality point and shoot would be Sony's RX100 series. So I have an RX100 III. It's very old, but it takes excellent photos and has like a zoom lens from 24 to 70. Some of the other versions of it go from 24 to 200, 24 to 120. There's all kinds of versions of the Sony RX100s. And then the Sony RX10 is also another nice high quality point and shoot. But all of us these days have cell phones with us, right? I mean, everybody has a smartphone with a good camera. So if you have an iPhone that's recent, the cameras are incredible. If you have a Google Pixel, my Google Pixel 6 that I own right now is just stunning pictures off it. This was a Google Pixel 3 when I took this picture, and I just think they're great. I mean, I had this in my pocket. The camera is waterproof. You didn't have to deal with it. I took it out. I snapped the shot when we were in a Boundary Waters trip in a terrible storm, and this rainbow came out. That whole trip, I was actually experimenting with it. I just wanted to see if I could not pull my camera out. I just wanted to use the cell phone. So these are all shots. And because the cell phone is so handy and it's so easy to get to, so you double click the power button and you get right into your camera mode. Then you can push your up volume button and take a picture. You don't even have to use your touch screen. And I found that I took a lot of really cool pictures that I was taking similar pictures with my Ricoh, but I wasn't carrying my Ricoh on this trip. So if you want to zoom in, it's just like, this is a family trip. So there's my kid. There we are. There's my kid looking grumpy so they call these Bryan adventures, where we're in the middle of nowhere and I look at a map and I see a river. I was like, hey, let's go explore that. And this was a Bryan adventure. So you can see we're dragging the canoe. But my wife is happy to go on. This was right before the Bryan adventure, actually. I should tell the truth. But cell phones are great. And they also have cool features like this. So you can make panoramic shots built right in. And then if you want to look younger, you can just put on the remove wrinkles on your selfie shot on your cell phone, and will make your face look plasticky. But this is a sunset shot with a cell phone. Fairly decent, I would say. Does everybody think that is fairly decent? Yeah. Here's that same shot with my real camera, so my mirrorless camera. There's a lot more detail. I could actually brighten this area up if I wanted to, but I didn't like it because I like the silhouettes. But there's a lot more detail in my digital SLR. I'll just zoom in a little bit. You can see the detail. You can just barely make out the logs, the driftwoods along the shore there. Whereas if we go back here, it just doesn't really have that kind of quality. But if you're not printing big, this would be fine. You could print 8x10 and this would look just fine at 8x10. And then the one thing with cameras, if you know their limitations, use it to your advantage. So if you know the camera can't get detail in the blacks, create silhouettes. So this is don't pretend that it's going to do what it can't. Just make it do what it can and make it do it better. So any thoughts on a polarizing filter on a cell phone? I hate to be plugging Stingray so much, but they make one. So it fits on all of them. So they have a little holder you can buy if you don't want to get their cell phones. But Amazon's loaded with spring clips for cell phones. Just go to Stingray's website, check out their cell phone polarizer, and you'll see their setup. That's what I use. I love it. So that's what I would do for any filters on cell phones. Here's another example of a cell phone shot. So this one over here is shot with a cell phone, and this is shot with my real camera. I can see some differences as a professional photographer. So there's a lot more detail in the trees over here, a lot sharper. This would print a lot bigger, not too shabby over here. The sun's blown out. The color is a little weird to me. So this is more of a natural color. And then you'll notice in the foreground, there's a big piece of flare here caused by the cell phone, but pretty darn respectable, I'd say. So if you have a cell phone, don't feel bad about using it. But one thing that I want to bring up here is this quote by Leopold. So Leopold said, recreation is valuable in proportion to the intensity of its experiences and to the degree which it differs from and contrasts with work-a-day life. And I hate to say it, but a cell phone is of your work-a-day life. You carry them all over. You use them to phone people. Maybe if you like to read the news on them at night, you're using these cell phones all the time. So it's something to keep in mind. Is your recreation, do you buy this quote? You know, if you buy that by Leopold, getting a dedicated camera breaks you out of your work-a-day life and makes your recreational experience more valuable. So that's the way that I think of it. So to carry all this gear, there are a million different backpacks on the market from different camera manufacturing companies or whatever. I don't like any of them. I like backpacks that fit like real backpacks that we would expect to fit from skiing, hiking, or whatever. So what I do is I use an Osprey pack, which is one of their ski packs. This is the Solidin 42. I also have the 32. And then I bought this padded insert, which is by a manufacturer called F-Stop Gear. And I put that in the inside of the pack, and that's how I carry them all. So now I have a pack that fits like a real backpack. It doesn't fit like a camera bag. It rides like a real backpack, like we all expect them to do, because we're backpackers and hikers. This is the way to go. Don't get suckered into buying a backpack specific for camera gear. Buy the Osprey with the F-Stop gear. And then this is the filter holder. If you're going to buy filters, that's the one that I use. So here's some other options on how to carry this stuff when you're out paddling. Dry bags, hard cases. If I'm backpacking, I'll often put my gear into a dry bag in my pack. Just different hard cases are possible. And then if you're a paddler, if you're a canoeist, get yourself a Watershed camera bag. This is Watershed. They're made in the USA. They're awesome camera bags. And this is their bigger of the two. So that's the Chattanooga. And I'll just show you all of this stuff right here, except for the tripod, fits in that bag. So it's just incredible. It's just like a gear hauler. So yeah, if there's no other questions about the gear, I think I'm a gearhead. So I went on way longer than I thought I was going to do it on that gearhead part. We'll get into the photography tips. So the first tip that I have for you is a landscape photography tip. And if you try this style of composition, you're almost guaranteed to get a good shot. It doesn't matter if you're shooting with a cell phone, a mirrorless camera, a point and shoot, it works. And what near far composition is you put something cool near you, you line it up with something cool in the background, so far away from you, and somehow you connect it through the middle. So here the connection is we have the colorful leaves of this foliage, this fall foliage, out onto the rocks to this point, connects to the rocks, and then connects to the light. And this light is coming back and lighting up the foreground. So that's the connection. That's easiest to make these in a vertical shot. So it's easier to learn this composition by turning your camera to shoot vertical, which is the native cell phone kind of way that we shoot cell phones, instead of in the landscape, which would be, like that. So here's what it looks like in the field. So here's the shot. And you'll notice that my camera is angled way down. And I'm actually my tripod legs are just out of shot here. So I'm so close to the C stack. So you angle your camera down and you almost like are touching the C stack. So here's the setup for this shot. Let me zoom in. So my tripod legs are just outside the shot over on the shot on the left. And then you can see how the camera is tilted downward. And I'm just like, here's the tripod leg here. And on this shot, it's just right outside of the camera frame. So basically what you're doing is you're stepping up as close as you can possibly get to your foreground and tilting your camera downward a little bit. The other thing that I would recommend doing if you want to do this in the field is this is called a neutral density graduated filter. And this is what it looks like on a camera. So see, it just attaches, there's a filter holder, which is that square thing with the screws in it. And then the filter threads down through the slots. And then what that does for you is here's a shot without it. These first two on the left are without it. And then the one on the right is with it. So you can see how it balances the exposure between the sky and the ground. This is a little bit later and the color got better, but you can see detail in the foreground and detail in the sky. And the way that you place these looks like this. So if this is the photo we're taking, here's the split. What we want to do is we want to move that split right up to the horizon. And for landscape photography, the settings are very easy. So f-stop f11 is 16, the lowest ISO you can shoot. And if you need a faster shutter speed, raise your ISO. If you need a slower one, you add one of those neutral density filters, the solid ones. And I always shoot in aperture priority mode, but you could do whatever. So again, the main elements of the near fires, we have the land in the foreground. That's an eye-catching subject. We have a middle area that connects to something cool in the backgrounds, which will often be sunset, sunrise, or mountains or something like that in the background. So here's an example. Here's our cool foreground. Here's our clouds in the background. We have that nice connection between the two. Here's what that looks like if we go horizontal. So our foreground are these rocks with the light reflecting off of it. We have the sunset in the background, and then we have the light of the sunset reflecting on the rocks and the lake water connecting it all together. And I'll just let you look at that one and decide if you can figure out what the foreground is and what the background is. And then the key to this style of composition is that foreground makes the shot. If you don't have something cool in the foreground, you're not going to get it. So if you were to follow me around at a sunrise or a sunset, what you would see is I wouldn't be looking out at the horizon. You would see me looking at my feet as I walk around, because I'm just looking for that cool thing down at the foreground. And the key is you want to make it big. You want to have a lot of it. You want to make it bold, because if it's not going to make an impression on your viewer. It's not going to draw your attention in. So you need that really cool, big foreground. And I'd say the background, if you're at sunrise and sunset, you're set. That's all you need. It's nice to have mountains or open body of water with cool clouds. But as long as you have the cool foreground, you're set, even if you don't have that fantastic cloud structure like we do in this shot. One thing to think about is after you find your cool thing is just shift around a little bit. So here's my original composition, this is my original composition on this, which I liked. It was okay. But then I was like, oh, look at that. There's like a little rock getting with water washed over it right there. So what I did is I walked forward and I put that in my foreground, and then we have the water washing over it. And I thought that made a better foreground, but both of those shots are very cool. So it's worth moving around a little bit after you do it. So that's landscape photography. So here's some tips for shooting people in adventure kind of settings. The first is fill the frame with the action. So whatever's going on in your action, you want to fill your entire frame with it. So here we're raising the American flag off of this sea kayak after we conquered this island. And I just made sure that all the paddlers' feet were in the shot in the bottom, and that the bow of the kayak was in the shot, but nothing else including it. That's called filling the frame. When you fill the frame with the action, whoever's looking at that shot after you take it will know what you're taking it of. So the other thing is, don't include anything that's not your partner, or the action that's going on. So your adventure partner and the action that they're doing. Don't include like, the seagull, unless they're trying to catch the seagull or something. And then take pictures of people in context looking small in landscapes, because it gives scale to things. So this one, I will say over on this shot, we didn't actually attach an American flag to a kayak. If I zoom in, you can see the flagpole between our legs. We just lifted up the kayak to make it look that way. So here's one of those shots where we have the paddler in context. So we have our adventure partner just in the context. Again, that's my wife being nice to me at the end of the day when we're all tired after I think we paddled like 15, 16 miles that day with a bunch of portages. And she was gracious enough to go out during the golden hours to paddle with me. But we have that nice context of the lake with the canoeist going through it. Here's another shot of the paddle. This is a selfie heading out. And here's an example of filling the frame of the shot with a paddler. So this is Jerry Vandiver, who's a country folk singer, music star, paddling a canoe through some riffles there. And then a close-up of a campsite. And the important elements in this shot are the tent, the paddler, the kayak, and a waterfall, right? So there's nothing else included than that. And you can even crop a little bit off the tent, because just having half of a tent gives us the entire story. Here's some more shots. So here's another example of, you may not even, on Zoom, you might not even be able to see the person, but there's a cross-country skier walking. I call this, it's okay to walk sometimes, because that was kind of sketchy area up there, but you can see this open river setting the scene as a landscape near far shot. And then all of a sudden the punchline is there's a skier out there. So it's a skier in context. And here's a person giving you scale, tent and mount bike. So again, more examples of this type of photography where we're filling the frame or we're giving context of the paddler in the environment and not including anything else other than the action that's going on. So hopefully those two tips, the near far and then the fill the frame, only include your paddling partner, your adventure partner, your backpacking partner, and the action that they're doing, or them in the context, will be good tips. So here's my shameless self-promotion before I get to any more questions is I do teach photo workshops, and you can buy my photos at bryanhansel.com. Right now, if you're in the Twin Cities, I do have a display up at the Egg and I in St. Paul. It's a fundraiser for the Friends of the Boundary Waters. So if you want to buy prints, you can get them there. And then if you're into paddling, I blog at paddlinglight.com. So if you're into paddling, you can see that there. And then any questions at all? Well, if there's no questions, I just want to thank everybody. I know I went long. I'm very long-winded, so I apologize for being long-winded. But I want to thank everybody for staying and listening to me. I hope that you got something out of the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And if you think of one later, you can get a hold of me at my website, just through email, or on social media. I'm on all the platforms pretty much.
We do have one here about drone do's and don'ts.
Yeah, drones. So drones are fun. The interesting thing about drones is you're going to need, if you're going to do any commercial work for them, you have to have an FAA license and a Minnesota DOT license in order to do any commercial work. So I do drone photography, but I can't post it on social media because MnDOT believes that that's commercial, even if I don't sell anything from it. But here's the do's and don'ts for drones. And this is pretty much everywhere, is you need to find out if you can fly before you fly. So you got to know before you go. FAA has application that you can download from the drone zone that will tell you if you're able to fly there. It does not include specific land restrictions that at the state level though. So if you can't take your drone off from somewhere, that app isn't going to tell you, but it gives you a good idea where you can fly, like where are the airports, where are the restrictions. Like, for example, you can't fly in the boundary waters. That app will tell you that you can't because it's restricted airspace. You can't fly in state parks without permission. So one of the really popular things that you see on social media are drones taking a picture of Split Rock Lighthouse. That's illegal unless you get permission from the lighthouse keeper or the park ranger to take off from parkland. And then there's just courtesy things. So don't fly them over people's heads. There's a bunch of rules and regulations with the FAA. You just got to follow them all because they all make sense. But yeah, just don't fly them over crowds near people. Don't crash them into trees and lose them in the wilderness. Don't fly them in the boundary waters. Yeah, so that's the drone kind of stuff. It's a really interesting type of photography. So I enjoy it, but they annoy me when I'm not flying them. So I try not to fly them around people. Another question is, can you fly over private land? Yes, you can. Private landowners have no, well, I should say this, the courts have not settled whether or not private landowners own the airspace over their house. There's a legal theory that they do own some, but there's never been a court case to say how much. So right now the FAA says that you don't own any airspace over your house. And unless somebody wants to challenge that, that's how it is. So you can fly a drone over private property as much as you want legally.
Any last questions for Bryan here? If not, we now have all the tips so that our next intro show is just going to be amazing, Jen. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks, Bryan.